Good morning, everyone. This meeting of the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board on January 16, 2024 is called to order. We will start today with a roll call, but would like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. Please mute your microphones if you or don't have anything to say. And as to public remarks, those will be at the end of the meeting. So we will do a roll call followed by introduction of staff from the Oregon Department of Energy. Max Woods sends his, I'm not sure condolences is the right word, but he can't make it today because he has no water or power, so no internet connections. So he asked me to pass that along to you. We do have three prospective new members whose applications are in the governor's office. They are still they are still members of the public at this point, and we will introduce those folks at the end of the meeting. So one other change, Tim Seymour of the Water Resources Department is now officially on the board, replacing Justin Iverson. So we'll go ahead and do the roll call vote now. Tim Seymour.
Yep, I'm here.
Aaron Ashley. Stephen Bedrick.
Here.
Susan Katz.
Susan's no longer on the board.
Yes, Susan recently left the board. Tom Roberts.
I am here.
Jim Doherty. Mia Burke.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Laura Feldman.
Here.
And from the Oregon State Legislature, Representative Levy. Representative Gamba.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here.
Good morning. Senator Gorsuch.
Good morning. I am present.
Great. Senator Hansel. Okay. Mark, perhaps you could introduce ODO staff.
Sure. Good morning. Mark Reese, Board Administrator, Oregon Department of Energy. Tom Cecilia is also here. I'll let Tom introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. Tom Cecilia, Hanford hydrogeologist.
And Sarah Lovetang.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Lovetang, and I am the Hanford ecologist working on the natural resource damage assessment.
And Matt Hendrickson.
Good morning, all. Matt Hendrickson, also with ODO, radioactive waste remediation specialist. So I do a lot, study up the tanks up there at Hanford.
Okay, thank you very much. Laura Feldman, would you like to offer a land acknowledgement, please?
Yes, thank you. We respectfully acknowledge that our advocacy, activism, and learning takes place on lands we inhabit throughout Oregon and Washington, cared for by Indigenous tribes and bands since time began. The Hanford nuclear weapons site encompasses culturally significant lands belonging to the Wanapum, the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, the Nez Perce, and Spokane Indian Reservation. We acknowledge the economic and social values, including systemic racism, classism, and the disregard for Indigenous, Black, and immigrant communities that made harm to this place possible. The interconnectedness of the people, the land, and the natural environment cannot be overstated. The health of one is necessary for the health of all. We recognize the pre-existing and continued sovereignty of these tribes and thank them for continuing to share their traditional ecological knowledge and perspective on how we might care for one another and the land. We are honored to be guests here. We commit to working towards cleanup and restoration of the Hanford site that is based on the future tribal use and stewardship of these lands and these waters.
Thank you, Laura. Mark Reese sent the October meeting summary out. Does anyone have any comments or changes to that meeting summary? Does anyone have any objections to approving the meeting summary by unanimous consent? Okay, meeting summary is approved. Next item on our agenda is U.S. Department of Energy update. Delmar Noyes and Roger Gordon will be giving that update. We're a few minutes ahead of schedule. Are they on online, Mark? Hi, Gary.
Good morning. Yes, I see both Delmar and Roger up. So let's see, we've got Delmar up. So let me go on and pull up his presentation for you. And let me know when you can see it.
I can see it, so please proceed.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank everybody for the time this morning. And with the weather, the ability to meet virtually is very nice. It sounds like somebody is having a major house issue. I know one of our staff members had a major flood that they're dealing with as well. So my name is Delmar Noyes. I'm the assistant manager for tank waste operations. The tank farms changed the name, but the same function with the Office of River Protection. And we'll talk a little bit about the test bed initiative demonstration. And then Roger Gordon will follow and give you probably what's more exciting is some of the updates on what's happening with the low activity waste and the WTP project. So next slide, please. So just start with a kind of an overview. The test bed initiative concept overview is basically, and I'll go through this again in more detail, but at a high level is a demonstration of removing the supernate out of an existing double shell tank. It happens to be SY101 with a filtration and treatment system that's in the tank. Same essential technologies as the tank side season removal system, same resin. Pre-treated waste we brought to the surface, confirmed in a delay tote, and then approximately 2,000 gallons collected for this demonstration. So the next step really is working through the process of outside disposal of this low activity waste. And that's really what this is demonstrating on a regulatory perspective. We picked SY101 for several factors. It has a large level of liquid waste, which means all the solids have settled out. So this system is designed for only that very low solid liquid wastes. And it's located in our West Farm area. So these activities are not impacting any of our DF law prep activities. That's the direct feed low activity waste facility that Roger will talk about, and all the preps that I'm doing at tank farms to start up and commission that facility. So this is in the west area, away from that. And it was also selected, among other things, it is a double shell tank. So it is a permitted system. We have 3 of these tanks in the west area, so this is one of the 3. Obviously, we currently have radioactive waste stored in these tanks, and as I mentioned, this tank has a lot of liquid radioactive waste. And intake pretreatment system will be installed in a riser, and that's what you see kind of here in the picture listed as number 2. And it basically will have a pumping capability that will send waste, the pump will be in the bottom, through a filter unit, and then through an ion exchange unit. So the waste brought to the surface will be only the pre-treated waste, and all the mechanical pieces are within the tank and within the tank ventilation system. Essentially, what we're doing here is removing the cesium because that's the bulk of the radioactive in the liquid fraction. And based on TSCR operations, to give you a sense of efficiency, we're removing 99.99% of that cesium, greater than that, before it's brought to the surface. Waste will be then sent to this delay tote. That is where we do confirmation that, in fact, the pre-treated waste is at the surface and nothing unexpected happens. And then it'll be moved over to the storage totes. We have 6 of those totes. They have about a 350 gallon, excuse me, capability, and they'll be filled to about 333 gallons. So about 1,900 gallons will be totally processed in these 4 totes. And these are certified DOE compliant transportation containers. So we call them totes, but they are certified transportation containers as well. So basically, at the completion of the on-site operations, all 6 of those totes would be staged for off-site treatment and disposal. Once we have the operations done, and it's be a very quick operation when the system's installed and permitted, it's only a couple-week operation. And then samples will be taken of the pre-treated waste to confirm all the radiological and organic and chemical compositions. That is an extensive sampling and analytical process to a sample analysis plan that's 3 to 6 months in duration. After we've confirmed the treatment and the composition, we'll split the sample, take 2 of the totes to Energy Solutions in Clive, Utah, which has the disposal facilities already on board that we would meet the waste acceptance criteria at that facility, and then the other half at Waste Control Specialists in Andrews County, Texas. The sample analysis will include physical, organic, inorganic, and radiological chemistry elements, and it'll be published in a final report that will support the shipment paperwork. So these are commercial vendors, and I mentioned the totes will be divided in half and 3 sent to each of these vendors. With that, the other supporting stuff, since this is tank waste, a couple other preparatory activities have already been completed. The first, on the radioactive waste management, we did evaluate the proposed 2,000 gallon waste stream and determined it was waste incidental to reprocessing, i.e. not high level waste, and can be satisfactorily managed by low level radioactive waste. Similarly with what we have been done with the TSCR operations. Again, that only applies to this 2,000 gallon demonstration. We also completed, and I should back up on that, and that really includes looking at the waste and confirming that when it's solidified, it's appropriate for land disposal. It will be compliant with the disposal facility and characterized to meet the waste acceptance criteria. We also, in parallel, produced the NEPA documentation for this activity. And again, I focused the EA. The evaluation was only for the 2,000 gallon demonstration that we're doing here, with a finding of no significant impact for both commercial facilities and transportation to both commercial facilities.
Delmar, could you go into a little more detail about the transportation? We're moving liquids, correct? What kind of transportation arrangements have been made, and what is the route?
I'd be happy to. I'll jump to that and come back. So basically, as I mentioned, the waste is pre-treated with 99.99% of the radioactivity removed, but the chemicals remain. That would be packaged in these totes, as I mentioned. Those are DOT certified transportation containers that would be then truck shipped to each of the vendors. As you mentioned, in the liquid form, so about 1,000 gallons. It would be then grouted at the disposal facilities and dispose in those facilities to their WAC waste acceptance criteria.
So will these shipments be going through the state of Oregon?
Actually, the route of these states shipments do not go through the state of Oregon. Neither the Clive, Utah facility nor the Andrews, Texas facility. So a couple other things on this process, just, sorry, go ahead.
That's my
Yeah,
hand.
Yeah,
Oh.
Delmar, sorry.
Why don't we do Laura first and then Sarah, please?
Okay, I was wondering about where the remaining, where does the remaining cesium go? Does it go, it's taken out before the rest of the waste is pumped to the surface?
Correct.
What you said?
That is correct. So in this conceptually, I don't know if you, can you guys see my pointer on the screen?
No.
Okay. But the number 2 intake pretreatment system, you see those long sins. Yeah, thank you. Right above where that marker is, that's where the ion exchange is. So the CST, which is a form of ion exchange that is removing the cesium, is collected in that vessel. So that's where all the cesium will remain. And then post operations, consistent with the RCRA permit, that would be removed from the tank, again, separate from the anything going off site, and stored on the same pads that the canisters we're using for the TSCR pretreatment system. So all of that remains on site and is in this operation inside the tank and or the riser to the tank.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah, please.
Yeah, earlier in the presentation, you said that 99% of the cesium was being removed. Excuse me. And then later in talking about the transportation, you said that 99% of the radioactivity was removed. And I just wanted you to clarify that. Okay. Yeah, so the cesium removal factor that we're seeing and we'll see here is greater than 99.99% actually. And then in the liquid, the bulk of all the radioactivity in the liquid fraction is the cesium. So it's, greater than like 98, 99% of all the radioactivity is in the cesium. The ion exchange media does pick up some of the other isotopes, but the primary component of all the radioactivity in the liquid fraction, and remember, we're just talking about the supernate here, not the solids. So essentially, this treated waste is, from a radiological perspective, if contact handled makes any sense to you, it has some radiological material left into it, but it's very, very low as compared to the feedstock, and all that cesium is captured inside the tank. So that's the percentages for cesium really represent the overall radiological content, because the other ones, although significant, are very low in quantity. A couple things, and then I can take a few more questions and we'll let Roger go, is this is done under RCRA, our research and development program. So all of our double shell tanks are RCRA permitted by the state of Washington, and everything that you're seeing here will be permitted under a research and development type of RCRA permit. So that will go forward. We're certifying the designs, and the state of Washington is in the process. It includes the independent qualified engineering certification. Sometime in the March East time period is when that permit itself would come out for public comment. So that's still working. And then it'd go through the public comment period,
and then eventually be issued before we could install the equipment and take any further actions. The other activity that's ongoing, and I see this question, so I'll finish this point and do the question, is there is a LDR, land disposal restriction variance, that's being executed through ecology, but EPA, and that really is tied to the land disposal requirements and basically documenting and certifying that the treatment, which is grout, will meet the land disposal requirements. And that document is now in public comment. I know the comment period is closed and they're resolving comments. So that's the other piece of the regulatory process that this activity is demonstrating.
Okay.
I got one more slide, and I can either take the questions now or finish that and take those afterwards.
So, Michael, technically you're a member of the public and can't participate in this meeting until we get to public comment according to my referee. So if my referee says otherwise, that's great. But otherwise, Michael, we have to wait till the end of the meeting. Sorry about that. Mia, would you like to go now or wait until after the final slide?
I can wait till Delmar finishes.
Okay, thanks. It should be only a few minutes. So activities, as I mentioned, we're completing the design. The permit is submitted. It'll go through the comment period, install and perform the on-site pre-treatment system. As we mentioned, all the cesium would stay in the tank. Perform the laboratory sampling analysis on the totes to confirm all the compositions, and then ship those totes offsite to the receiving for grouting and disposal. That would be sometime mid-calendar year 25 by the time it was retreated, treated, and all the analytical work and prepared to do that. So we're finalizing the design, and ecology is working on the permit. Following the permit, installation and operations, as mentioned, about 6 months. The processing itself is really only a week or two activity. Next slide. So this is SY farm. So you can just see where SY 1 and 2 are. 1, 2, and 3 are the only double shell tanks in the west area. So this over here that you see the pipe running to, that's actually the active ventilation system for those systems. And then the next slide. Briefly, you'll just be able to get a sense of where that equipment is located with the inside the farm, with the delay tote, the processing tote, and power supplies and stuff being outside the farm. And all the processing equipment you're looking, the other picture is actually in a riser inside the tank itself. And that was really all I had for a slide. So I take a few questions here, and then Roger can go, and we'll take questions after that as well.
Okay, Mia.
Hi, yeah, thank you for your presentation, Delmar. I just have a few kind of clarifying questions. I was wondering if all 2,000 gallons fit in that first tote that you're going to be using. I think you call it the delay tote for sampling. Do all of the 2,000 gallons fit inside of that?
No, that will be the same volume, so about 350 gallons. And that's just a spot where we can confirm the pretreatment effectiveness before we put it into the storage totes, the 6 other ones. And that tote itself will not be shipped and will be empty at the end of the processing.
Okay, and then from the time you take a sample, how long does it take to get that sample back with the results?
Yeah, that is, as you could imagine, since this is a demonstration as well, a very, very involved sample analysis, including radiological, chemical, and organics. About 4 to 6 months, probably about 5 actually, between collecting the sample, doing all the analytical work. The organics are the ones that take the most time, and then documenting all that in your quality records and getting the final report. So, 4 to 6 months on the analytical report to the final report.
But you were saying that the whole operation takes only 2 weeks?
The actual operations of pre-treating the waste, so the system inside the tank, with the pump and the filtration and the ion exchange. To treat that 2,000 gallons will only take about a week or two. And at that point, we'll have 2,000 gallons each stored in those 6 totes. But obviously the installation of the equipment and then, as you mentioned, the analytical process takes significant time. But the actual operations of the treating the waste is short duration, a couple weeks.
Okay, and then so when the delay totes are they out in the open during that 4 to 6 month process, or what's the shielding or what's containing them?
They are out in the open. There is no shielding because remember this is pre-treated, so this is very low radioactive, so there's no radiation hazards. They'll probably be a lot less than the stuff around them in the tank farms, but they'll be controlled within the boundaries and the control processes of the SY farm itself. But there is no shielding concern because it, like mentioned, it is pre-treated waste, and this is, in our terminology, contact handled stuff that you can walk up to and stand next to as long as you want, basically.
Okay. And then I just have another question about the transportation route. Will the waste be going north through Spokane?
It's going through federal freeway systems, and I believe that is the primary route for both facilities.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well.
Oh, go ahead, Delmar.
I'm just going to I can take more questions now, or we can let Roger know and we can both answer questions, whatever is your preference.
I think we have several more. Laura, and then Matt Hendrickson.
Yes, Delmar, what will the sampling report contain? What kind of information will we be getting back from that? Just curious, what is it going to be? Information that tells us something in terms of success of the treatment?
The report will give you pretty much anything you can think about relative to what the treated waste composition is. And here I'm looking for my notes here. So it will include, obviously the radiological content, the chemical content, organic content, anything that's regulated from a chemical or radiological perspective, or anything that could impact the waste acceptance criteria for the receiving sites, all that will be in a complete report.
Is there the possibility that it might be returned to Hanford?
Well, once we certify the waste and we will confirm it all that meets the waste acceptance criteria, the receiving facility prior to shipment. It's called manifesting in RCRA speak. So we will know that it will be treatable at the receiving facility before we ship it. So that is not an expected outcome. It'll be pre-certified and pre-checked before the shipment occurs.
Okay, thank you.
Matt Hendrickson.
Hi, Delmar, thanks for coming in today. I have a question. This is a research, not an RDD, but you're trying to get a lot of data from this process. Will there be any data information coming back post-grouting from the receiving facilities, or is it just going straight into their line trenches and such?
I believe, and I'd have to reconfirm it, but as part of the variance process, there is some confirmation sampling at the treatment facilities that wouldn't normally happen, and so these pre-samples we're taking here are far more extensive than anything you would do in routine operations. And to your question, the same point is true. The sampling of the post-treated grouted waste at the disposal facilities will be sampled, as well as the grout formulations evaluated. That was part of the LDR, land disposal restriction variance process, working with the EPA as well.
Thank you, Delmar.
Delmar, who is putting together the formula for the grout? Is that DOE, the national lab, or the contractor?
The vendors themselves have their formulations. Obviously, we will be reviewing it, and that's actually a piece of what the LDR variance process is looking at as well. But it's the vendor's formulation for their disposal to meet their WAC criteria, and all that will be confirmed obviously prior to shipment.
Thank you. Mia?
Hi, yeah. How many samples do you take from each of the delay totes?
You know, I could get that. I don't know off the top of my head what the volume or how many samples are taken. We can follow up with the specifics if you're interested.
That would be great. My other question is, in the case that the samples come back and they don't meet the waste acceptance criteria, they still have too much cesium, what is the plan moving forward from there?
Okay, good question. Well, you know, first off, this is the same ion exchange media that we're using with TSCR, and we have treated 800,000 gallons. So we have a very, very high level confidence that that won't happen. But I mean, if it did, obviously when we were unable to, you know, either transport or dispose at the receiving facilities, you know, we would most likely, the final default would be to reintroduce the material back into the tanks.
Okay, I have one more question, Delmar. What happens to that cesium saturated ion exchange resin? How do you handle that? Does it go into the same pad with the TSCR cesium capsules or containers?
Yeah, so a good question. And again, part of the RCRA research and development permit will include removal of the equipment, and the permit will include that the actual ion exchange media portion of the system will be stored on the pad with the ion exchange columns from TSCR. And they'll go through the same evaluation and disposal process with the ion exchanger from TSCR and post-TSCR operations.
Okay, thank you. Good presentation. Does anyone have any additional questions before we move over to Roger?
And I'll still be here when Roger's done too, if something comes up while Roger's talking.
Okay, thank you.
Your mic, Roger.
Thanks, Gary. Good morning. This is, everybody hear me okay? All right, great. Roger Gordon. I work for DOE ORP as well. I work for the waste treatment plant project. And I'm currently the readiness manager for the project. So my presentation is pretty much kind of the current status of where we're at in the commissioning of the plant. And then we'll take some questions afterwards that you might have. So Gary, next slide. So this is a graphic we use to kind of describe where we're at, where we're headed. We call this the mountain graphic. As you can see in the middle where it says where we are now, currently melter 1 is heated up to 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. And we've got 30 inches of melt pool in melter 1. The off-gas system is for the most part online, and we're currently making preparations for heating up melter 2, hopefully here in the middle of February. After we get both melters online, we'll make sure the off-gas system is operating normally. We've got a number of tests and exercises. The first one is the anhydrous ammonia pre-startup safety review. And this is a review that we will do to make sure that the plant is ready to accept ammonia onto the site, which is used for the process in the off-gas system for removing NOx. We've got a couple of emergency preparedness exercises we have planned, and then we will roll into the coal commissioning management assessment, which is basically an assessment to make sure that the plant and the contractor is prepared to begin the cold commissioning part of the phase of the project. So in the cold commissioning, we'll be introducing a simulant, which is very similar to the waste feed that is currently being staged in AP 106. So it's very similar to the feed, but it just doesn't have the radiological component. And we'll be using that for testing the melter systems, the support systems, and then the off gas as well, especially to make sure going out of the stack meets the permit requirements. That's probably a several month project. After that, we'll start in the cold commissioning management assessment. I think the current goal right now is this summer. I don't have an exact month. I'm just going to say probably July, August timeframe for the CCMA. After that, we'll get into some additional reviews to make sure that the contractor's ready for their operational readiness review. So then the contractor will do their operational readiness review, and then the DOE will come in behind them and conduct theirs. And the purpose of that is, again, to make sure that the plant is ready to receive actual tank feed from AP 106. We call that kind of like start of the hot commissioning phase. So that's pretty much the big picture view of where we're at.
Roger, could you, for many of us that aren't completely familiar with the terminology, can you define what the difference is between cold and hot commissioning?
Yeah, sure. So cold commissioning is we're introducing a simulant. So it's got the chemical constituents of what the waste stream will look like. Hot commissioning is basically introducing the waste feed itself that has the rad component. So really the only difference between the cold and the hot is the radiological piece of it. Is that good?
Yes, thank you.
All right, great. Good question. Next slide, Gary. So this is a pictorial, the next two slides, to talk about melter 1 and 2 heat up. Like I said, we're just getting ready to make preps for heating up melter 2, so I'll just sort of use this to kind of explain our path for melter 2 heat up. Currently, we are installing 18 startup heaters into the lid of melter 2. You can see the melt on the top left picture. It looks like where the number 1 is. That's actually a startup heater. And the best thing I always say is kind of think of a big toaster. So we're going to install 18 toasters into the top of the heater, and this is what we're going to use to heat up the inside of the melter from ambient up to 2100 degrees. So when we do that and we initiate melter heat up, we'll be heating up the melter in lifts. So we'll heat up, the first heat up will go up to 300 degrees, and then we'll let it sit there for about 24 hours. And the purpose of that is to bake the refractory bricks and to make sure that that the material in the melter heats up without causing any sort of brittle fracture or damage to the refractory bricks. After 24 hours, we'll heat it up again to about 900 degrees, and we'll lift it up to there, and we'll hold it for another 24 hours. And then we heat it up from 900 to 1200 to 1500, all the way up to 2100 degrees. So the whole process is about 10 to 15 days to heat it up to 2100 degrees. After we heat it up to 2100 degrees, then we'll start introducing frit. And basically frit is the glass beads that we use to kind of start the melt pool. So we'll add, they're 400-pound bags. So we figure about eight bags will add about 2 inches of molt level. So we'll start adding the frit, and we'll bring it up to about 18 inches of melt pool. And then at that point, we'll have a nice melt pool at 18 inches. And then what the plant will do is we'll remove 3 of the heaters, and we'll install 3 bubblers. And the purpose of these bubblers, when the melter is operating, is they basically add air pressure into the molten glass, and we use that for mixing. So we'll add 3 bubblers. We'll have 15 startup heaters in there, and then we'll continue adding the frit, and then we'll lift it up to 25 inches. at that point, we'll start a transition from, so at this time, we still got the 15 startup heaters, and that's the heat that's maintaining the glass pool. When we get to 25 inches, we'll start a transition where we'll start turning off startup heaters and start introducing the Joule heating power supply, which is just basically imagine we've got 3 electrodes on one side of the melter wall, and we've got 3 electrodes on the other side of the melter wall, and we'll introduce a current through the pool, and that Joule heating will actually maintain the heat, the 2100 degrees. So let's see, for melter 1, we did that in September 1st of 2023. We actually started on Joule heating, and it's currently running, like I said, at 2100 degrees. After we verify that the Joule heating is working satisfactorily, we'll start adding the frit up to 30 inches, between 30 and 31 inches, and that's the level for the melter. So then the melter will be online and on Joule heating. So next slide. So this is another graph that we're using. The top half of the graph is showing the melter, and then the 2 containers you see are each melter has 2 discharge chambers. We have a west discharge chamber and the east discharge chamber. So after we get the melt pool and we're at 31 inches, the next part of the process or the commissioning is to ensure that we can actually do a pour. So we'll do a pour out of the east discharge chamber to verify we can actually pour, and then we'll do another pour out of the west discharge chamber. And typically what we're doing is we'll do a pour for about 10 to 20 minutes just to make sure we get a good pour. Add about 4 to 6 inches into the container. After we do that with the first melter, after we got it online and we did a pour, then we started bringing on components of the off-gas system. So as you know, the off-gas system, we maintain the melter at a negative pressure. And so we use the off-gas to remove the venting off of the melter, and we run it through different components before going out of the stack. So we want to bring on these components like the wet electrostatic precipitator, the filters, the carbon bed, the TCO, the thermolytic converter oxidizer, and then the caustic scrubber. So we've been bringing those online, and then we'll just verify that when we have both melters online that we're still balancing the system to ensure that the exhauster fans can maintain the negative on both melters at the same time.
Roger, are there any radioactive components in the off-gas, iodine, for example?
In the actual components or in the off-gas itself?
In the off-gas itself, coming
right. Yeah, so right now with just the clean glass in there, there are no, the only, I guess, hazard of concern right now is there's a little leaching of chromium out of the refractory bricks that's being caught up in the filters and the carbon bed. But until we get into cold commissioning where we actually introduce simulant, there aren't any other hazards right now.
So during hot operation, what will be in the off-gas? Are there going to be any radioactive components?
So yeah, so just to go back, so when we get into cold commissioning, we'll actually introduce the a simulant which mirrors the chemical constituent of the feed. And then part of the cold commissioning activity is we're doing an environmental performance demonstration test where we actually ensure that the off-gas components remove the chemical constituents of concern. And there's a whole plethora of them that's in the simulant. And so we'll confirm that test, which is one of the requirements before getting out of cold commissioning, before going in hot commissioning. And then, of course, the only addition in hot commissioning is the rad component of that. And then I guess I would just kind of say, or to clarify what Delmar was talking about with the cesium removal. You know, it's very similar to our waste feed as well. before coming to law, it goes through the tank side cesium removal system, which removes the cesium. So, you know, our waste, although I say it's hot or radioactive, it's very low. It's a very low activity because of the removal of the cesium, which is the main rad hazard.
So in the simulant, will you have iodine in the simulant? I guess we're particularly interested in iodine because of the past history of releases of radioactive iodine from Hanford.
I know there is some. I don't know the exact, you know, breakdown of the simulant. I can certainly get it, but I do believe there is some iodine in there. I know that is one of the chemicals of concern in the tank waste.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, next slide. So pictures are always awesome. So I'll start with the top left. This is melter number 1. And what you're seeing with all the cables is this is actually the melter 1 with all the startup heaters installed. You can see a bunch of, it looks like about 12-inch diameter plates. So we've got 18 of these ports. So we've got 18 startup heaters in the melter lid. So that's just a view of that. What's kind of neat, I'll just show with this one right here, is when the plant right now is at 2100 degrees, standing on top of the melter lid and putting your hand on it, it probably is just very lightly warm to the touch. So the lid is probably, I'd say it's about 18 to 24 inches thick. Provides a very good insulation between the melt pool and the workers working on top. This is probably one of the busiest places in the plant during operation, as the workers will be replacing bubblers and thermocouples throughout the operation of the melter. Top right picture, this is one of the operators. This is actually the first bag of frit that's added to the melter. This was done back in August of 23. Each bag is about 400 pounds. And so I'd say this one bag is about a 1/4 inch, adds about a 1/4 inch to the melter pool level. So I always use the 8 bags equals 2 inches lift. It's just kind of a rule of thumb we've been using. Lower left picture, this is the melter 1 operator and the test director. This is actually monitoring the first frit pour. So the commissioning test director is actually controlling the commissioning activity from the with the melter 1 operator. And then the picture on the lower right, this is October of 23. This, what you're seeing is a thermal picture looking through the sort of horizontal through the discharge chamber, and this is the actual pour from the melt pool into the first container. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting to actually see actually pouring into the container. Next slide, please. So left picture, this is the commissioning text. This is in the finishing line. This is actually our first full container, first part of December. This is a big milestone for the plant, is getting the first container through. It is, each container is about 1,800 pounds. And then with the glass inside, there's closer to about 15 to 16,000 pounds. So this is just a nice picture to show you what, you know, the size of the container and what it looks like. So once it comes into the finishing line, which is getting toward the end of the process of through the law facility, this is where they will lid the container, and then they'll survey when we're in hot operations. Then they'll survey it to make sure it's doesn't have any contamination on the outside. But since it's just clean glass, we're just lidding it, and then we brought it out into the truck bay. So the top right picture shows the container being lifted out of the finishing line, and it's coming into the export truck bay, and where it is right now. And we had a big ceremony. A lot of people kind of got to come for that milestone as well, and got to sign the container and that container will stay out the waste treatment plant. And then a really cool picture is this lower right picture. You can actually see the kind of the green right there. So that's the actual glass in the container. So you're looking down into the lid, and you can actually see the glass. And I saw a hand up, Matt.
Oh, I can wait till you're done with your presentation. It's just a placeholder for me. Thank you.
Okay, great. Almost finished. Next slide. Oh, and maybe that is the last slide.
That's the last slide.
All right. So, like I said, Melter 2, we're looking at here next 3 to 4 weeks. We'll get into Melter 2 heat up. We just finished the last big milestone this weekend, just to verify in leakage through the melter, is meeting the design limits in order for the off-gas system to be able to maintain. So that was passed satisfactory. So now we're just making preps, getting the starter heaters installed and knocking out a set of punch list items to get into Melter 2 heat up. So with that, I can take some questions. And I see Matt's hand up.
Well, you almost addressed what I was going to ask. I've got 2 questions. The infiltration issue. Can you describe a little bit about the changes made to Melter 2 that address that infiltration and reducing it? That's 1. 2, the old feeder system seems a mighty old-fashioned way of doing it there, 400-pound bags at a time. How is the automatic hopper frit feed system coming along?
So the first question, the infiltration, you're talking in leakage, correct?
Correct, yes, of the atmosphere.
So the in leakage in Melter 1. So when the melter comes to Hanford, it doesn't come as a completed unit. They come from it's Henderson. It's a company out of Utah. I think it was Henderson. They come and then they come to here, and then here it's assembled, and especially installing the refractory bricks. It's kind of like pouring them and installing them. So you're actually building the melter. And when the melter was built, there was a bigger than normal gap between the lid and part of the melter, and it was mostly centered around the air lances. And what the air lances are is they actually provide an air pressure into the pool to help with to initiate a pour by adding compressed air. So that gap, there was a number of in leakage issues. The air lance I'm talking the most because it was probably the biggest one. So where what we've had to do is redesign the part of the air lance so we had a better seal between the lid and the actual melter body. So that is currently ongoing and they're being installed. I think it's for last week and this week. And then from that, then we'll test the in leakage again. We had a couple of other areas as well within the discharge chamber, especially around the video probe and some of the thermocouples. Those have been addressed, and really right now we're just kind of waiting on getting the modified air lances installed, and that should address Melter 1. The good news is whatever we're doing for Melter 1, we're doing to Melter 2 as well. So we've actually made the change, inserted the new air lances to Melter 2, and then we ran the cold test, and we showed that we've significantly reduced the in leakage. So we're kind of using Melter 2 as sort of a test. We'll practice it on Melter 2 because Melter 1 is hot, so that when we go actually and do the change to Melter 1, we can minimize time and the crews have practice. And then hopefully once they get the air lances installed and tested, then it'll address the issue as well. So Matt, does that help on that?
No, yes, it does. I really like hearing that you're using Melter 2 as a test for 1 because we don't want that to shut down.
Yeah.
How about the frit feed?
The frit feed. So we're actually For just adding the initial clean frit, we're using the 400-pound bags into the top of the melter. When we actually transition, and part of the checkout operation, which is where we're kind of heading to now, is we're actually going to be setting up the. We've got hoppers that'll actually feed the feed prep vessel, which will be the normal way of adding and mixing glass with the feed. So we've actually got a vendor here in Pasco. They're actually preparing the feed, the glass feeds, the mixture for the actual glass. When we get into the cold simulant or the cold commissioning, they'll bring it by truck. We'll use air pressure to offload the truck and put them into the hoppers, which is up on the plus 48 level. And then from there, we'll actually introduce glass from those hoppers into the feed prep vessel. And then that'll be mixed in the prep vessel. It'll be sampled to make sure we've got the proper amount of glass to in the future waste. And then it'll go into the staging vessel, the feed prep, which is feed prep vessel number 2, and that'll actually be the feed tank for the melter. So we're getting close to getting into checkout for that part of the commissioning. Right now, I think the focus is on address the in leakage and then get melter 2 up, and then sort of working on the checkout on melter 1. After we get the air lances issue, resolved.
Okay, Mia and then Sarah, please.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Roger. I have a question about the glass former system. We heard that the augers were binding up and there were some issues with the system. I'm wondering kind of what updates you have on that you could provide.
So the augers, we've got 2 hoppers upstairs on the plus 48 level. So the augers were kind of binding up a little bit. We worked with a vendor down in San Diego and redesigned the auger to allow for a feed without plugging them up, and that's been proved successful. So the plan is the vendor in San Diego is manufacturing a couple new ones for us, and the plan is to swap out the melter 2 one first, and then move over to melter 1, and that should address that issue. So they've run tests with the new augers, and it works really good. We found that the glass is a very fine material, the silica, and so we're finding that it's not binding up like it did before.
That's great news.
Yep.
How difficult is it to swap one of those out on, for example, melter 1 that's already up and running?
So on melter 1 right now, we're just adding the 400-pound bags of the clean glass. So we actually haven't used the hoppers yet. So we'll plan on doing that. That's why they want to do melter 2 first, is while we're heating it up, get melter 2, and then we'll switch over and do melter 1 afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead,
And
Sarah.
Sarah?
Yeah, so my question will probably reflect the fact that I'm an ecologist and I don't do like the tank waste issues. I'm looking at other issues at Hanford. But so my question really is, it looks like the glass is all cracked. And I guess I assumed that they were glass logs and that solid glass log would help to contain that nuclear or whatever, the hazardous waste much longer, because we know that glass lasts long in ancient archaeological sites. So it just seems to me that what you have there is a container full of glass shards, and it's not a log so much, or am I just looking at the surface, and is it a log below that surface?
Roger, you may give the shot at this one?
Yeah, go ahead, Delmar.
Yeah, so in the PAs and the work, the glass, this is what we expected. The glass is never going to be in one log. The waste and the properties of the glass to retain that waste are are unaffected by the shards. So it's not the monolithic nature of the glass that's keeping the material in the glass. It's the fact that the material is actually captured in the glass itself. So that was that the glass would be fractured and not one log was always the expectation, and the same physical activities. So in our PA work, in all of the glass disposal work, both here at Savannah River, the glass is fractured, and that in no ways impacts its capability of retaining the waste in the matrix of the glass form itself. So that was fully expected, and the whole volume of that glass will be fractured in that way. And the other piece that you're probably aware of is in the analysis, we don't credit the containers in the disposal configuration at all. So it's all relying on the physical capture of the material in the glass. That's why glass is such a great material for especially high level waste, is it doesn't have to be in a monolithic form.
Are there different types of glass, or is there only one type of glass you're using?
For the initial commissioning piece right here, this is just glass beads that come from the same vendor out of Pasco. When we get into cold commissioning and hot ops, then we have actually a group of glass scientists, called them mad scientists, who actually develop different formulations of silica that'll be added to with the tank waste. And that's all been tested over here at P&L. And so they've actually been testing with actual tank waste and to make sure that the formulations work and create the glass necessary to get the immobilization.
Can you describe how these containers are closed? Are they welded shut?
So these are not welded shut. For the high level waste containers, they'll be welded shut. For these, you can kind of see the lower right picture. It's just basically a lid right there that is actually, the lid is actually press fit right onto that. And it takes quite a bit of force to press fit it on there. And that's, so it's more of a mechanical installation. And then they'll be loaded onto trucks and sent over to the integrated disposal facility, which is a little over a mile away for disposal. Once we get into hot operations.
Thank you. Laura Feldman?
Yes, I'm concerned about the radioactive iodine in the very small amounts as was stated. I'm concerned about that going out the stack, and I, unlike some people, believe that any amount of radioactive iodine is not a good thing. And I just wonder how this will be monitored and how community can access the monitoring results.
So the part when we get into cold commissioning, like I said, toward the end of it, one of the tests, the demonstration test we'll be conducting is the environmental performance demonstration test. And the simulant that's being used is representative of the chemical constituents in the tank waste. And so that we will actually demonstrate that the off-gas components remove those constituents such that the air going out of the stat will meet the air permit requirements. So that is a key milestone in the cold commissioning to ensure that what we're putting out of the stack is, meeting the legal requirements. And whether we're talking iodine or any of the other constituents of concern. So, I'm not trying to, we're just as concerned. So, we want the test to be successful. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I just always think, as a community activist, it would always be nice to know what the levels are and how
Yep.
we can keep track of it ourselves.
Yep. I mean, my hope is, I'm not the scientist side, is a lot of the iodine will get captured into the actual glass itself, and so there'll be a very minimal amount that actually go through the off-gas system. But we are working on some, the carbon bed is another good example, and the scrubber for actually removing the iodine as well. The carbon bed, we use we're actually looking at some different material that actually help address constituents like iodine. So like right now, the caustic scrubber will be one of the key components for removing iodine. So those will help minimize, what goes out the stack. And the demonstration tests will help confirm that.
Okay, thank you, Roger.
Yep.
Okay, I think Roger and Delmar, one of the things you're hearing is there is a high level of sensitivity to, in particular, radioactive iodine emissions from the site. Mia?
Yeah, I have a follow-up to Laura's question. What kind of monitoring will be done during operations, and will it be put out in a report? Will it be publicly available? How is that going to work?
So we've got a number of permits for the site, and the one probably a concern would be the air permit. And so there we've got survey equipment on the off-gas system that measures the exhaust going out the stack. So that I assume that's all will be public and available. And then during the EPDT, the demonstration test itself, we've got a number of sample ports will be used as well for taking those samples across each of the components.
Okay. I also have a question for Delmar. This is about TBI. At one point, there was talk of doing a phase 3 of the test, and I'm just wondering if that is still on the table, or what's going to happen after phase 2 if it's successful.
Thanks. Good question. And obviously, we're in ongoing dialogue about what the next steps are in terms of applying grouting technology to an offsite disposal facility. So we're in conversations with the state on potential options. None of those final decisions have been made, but that would be some application to low activity waste and offsite disposal is being evaluated. So obviously they rely on the successful demonstration of this demonstration, but we're actively looking in those options. If you look at the land disposal requirement variance that EPA did, it acknowledges that fact as well, that the parties are looking at additional application. Now, we may not do it as a phase 3 TBI demonstration. It may be some other application, but no decision has been made yet. But they'll be informed by this activity, and we are in those conversations and are looking at the next step.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments for the Department of Energy? If not, we can let you guys go, but excellent presentations, and this has been very educational, and I think both of these presentations were spot on in terms of what we needed to learn about. So thank you very much.
Can I offer just one piece of additional information? I know you're asking about the secondary waste stream, the off-gas system from the law facility with the concern of capture. We talked, I think last time we were together on the tank farm side, we have done extensive upgrades to the effluent treatment facility and the liquid retention facilities, because that waste that ultimately goes through those air treatment systems is collected and then is sent to the effluent treatment facility for additional treatment, including the acetyl-nitrile system that we added. Additional separation and treatment is there. The final, as you probably were, final discharge from that system is achieves, I should say, drinking water standards, and then the solid materials would be captured in the integrated disposal facility as well. So that's the pathway for even the small residuals in that waste stream that don't go up the stack would be treated through that pathway, just for, complete picture of that full cycle.
Okay, thanks, guys. So we are well ahead of schedule, so I thought we can take a 10-minute break prior to 10 o'clock when EPA is scheduled to come on. But in the meantime, we can maybe address a couple quick pieces of board business. So a week or so ago, we sent out a draft letter, called it the TPA, or Tri-Party Agency Reminder Letter. And it's kind of a standard piece of communication that's designed to remind the agencies of the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board's statutory authority and also responsibility, because I think sometimes people don't, especially newer people that we're working with at the agencies, aren't really familiar with the Oregon Hanford Board's mandate, if you will. So that draft is out there. We'd like to send that out in the coming week or so. If anyone has any objections, I would like to hear them now. Or if you would like to make any changes. So not hearing anything, I'll give you guys another week to look at it if you haven't looked at it before. Otherwise, I think I will assume that that letter is approved as written, and that we can work with the Oregon Department of Energy and send that out. Okay. The second is we've been talking about education outreach, and there's been some work done on the side, and some we need basically a committee of this board to work with us and try to move that forward, because it's kind of, I wouldn't say completely stalled, but we do need to move it forward. And I think it would be good if we had 2 or 3 people that could dedicate some time to that. So are there any volunteers right off the bat, or should I pull you outside the meeting? I'll pull you outside the meeting. Laura, you?
I'd be interested.
Okay.
Jeff.
And I think Stephen Bedrick is interested as well, so.
Yeah, I am. Or rather, I mean, I've been involved thus far in what we've been trying to do, but it's also stalled out, like you say, Jeff. So perhaps some fresh ideas or more dedicated attention will be helpful.
Yes, and hopefully in the very near future, we'll have 2 or 3 of our new members. One in particular has expressed interest in this topic and has good contacts at several of the local universities. So, okay, I'll send out a follow-up email on that. The third thing I'd like to mention right now is we have last year, we were asked by the Tri-Cities Business Journal to submit, I guess, what you would call an op-ed piece. They have a Hanford edition every spring, and I've talked with Max Wood about this, and Max and I don't think that whatever we as the board put together this year would be much different than what we had put in writing last year. So the question is, or it's an opportunity for someone, another organization or someone represented here, to offer maybe a different perspective. And if you're interested, please let me know now or later, and then I can pass that along to the Tri-Cities Business Journal, and you can work with them in putting together your perspective on the Hanford Cleanup Board that would be separate. I mean, you could put your perspective on Hanford separate from that of the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board. It would be your personal perspective or the perspective of the organization that you're with. So if you're interested in that, let me know.
Jeff, clarifying question. Can it be someone I might recommend to give input to that op-ed?
Certainly. The decision, of course, would be up to the publication, but I'll be happy to pass along anything that you send me from multiple organizations. I think the more substantive your proposal is, the better it would be received. Okay. So why don't we, since we're ahead of schedule, take a break and reconvene at 10? Is that okay, Mark?
That works. I would just remind folks to mute, and you can go ahead and turn your cameras off during the break.
Okay, we're adjourned, or not adjourned, but we're on break till 10. Thank you. Okay, it's 10 o'clock. Let's reconvene. Meeting is back in order. And next order of business is an update from U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Dave Einen, I see your smiling face there this morning. Over to you.
Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. Obviously, you know, you regularly see Jeff Schramm, but he had a doctor's appointment, so I'm covering for him. Again, glad to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm afraid I'm going to keep you a little bit ahead of schedule because I'm not one to go long, but you know, some updates of things that we're working on. I think you all know that we've got the 100K RIFS that we're finishing our comments on.
David, sorry to interrupt, but you know, we've got some new folks here and a lot of people that aren't intimately familiar with terminology and so on. So if maybe you could broaden your scope a little bit and explain as you go through it, for example, what a ROD is or an RIFS, so that thank you.
Certainly, excellent. Thanks for that feedback. So yeah, so our focus, EPA's focus, is on obviously on Hanford cleanup, the cleanup of the past practices, the releases, groundwater, et cetera. And it focuses, and we oversee the Department of Energy's implementation of Superfund. And that's and it's got a whole, you know, there's a whole process to go with Superfund. And you investigate the nature and extent of contamination and evaluate the risk and select a remedy. And that first part, the studying the nature and extent and evaluating the risk, that is the remedial investigation feasibility study, where you again, nature and extent, figure out your alternatives, what the risk, et cetera. And that process has been going on for a long time, obviously, here at Hanford, and we're working on the final report, checking for comment incorporation, et cetera, for the 100K area, for the whole area. We've done partial actions in the past, so this is the final action for the whole area, whole 100K area.
Can you describe what is in the K area in terms of reactors, waste areas, burial grounds, so on? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so there were two of the reactors. So there were of the original design reactors, right? That started with 100B. You have 100B and 100C at they're the most upriver going along the horn of the Columbia. You have 100B and 100C right next to each other. Then you have the 2K reactors. And they are nominally the same design as the others, except they're quite a bit larger. So that's just like, they were like just scaled up. And so you have 100K East and K West. And associated with these reactor sites, on around the horn, you've got N, 100D and D replacement, D and DR, then H, and then F is the furthest one along the horn. N is the one different reactor. That was a newer design, a different design. But on the others, the basic way those operated it was they took water from the river. They did standard kind of water treatment to remove as much as they could, just like you would for drinking water. And then that cooling water went over directly in contact with the fuel elements that were loaded into the reactor. And that water then was discharged either directly back to the river or if they had detected a failure of a fuel element by a radiation spike in the water, it was diverted to basins or cribs, either one. So the other thing that was very common, you know, to the reactors was they used sodium dichromate, which has as a corrosion prevention agent and to keep scale from building up. And of course, that has the form of chrome that's toxic to fish, right? So that's an issue, and we're dealing the primary issues that we deal with on these reactors isn't so much, there's a few radionuclides, but not so much the radionuclides. It's really the chrome that's left behind that we're most worried about. And each reactor area was its own individual operation, if you would, and the reactor operator, the manager of that area ran it how they wanted to, and they had their full set of utilities. They had steam, they had, you know, everything was sort of self-contained. So there were burial grounds for failed equipment and other radioactive waste. There were, and each of these sites had those. So in part of 100K, again, is there's what we commonly call the mile-long K trench, which for if there was a fuel failure, that was where the water went. The idea being that some of the contaminants would leach off into the soil before going into the river. Just a little fun fact. There's when all the reactors were operating, and I'm sure many people are familiar with the Columbia River that runs anywhere from 50,000 cubic feet per second to 150,000 cubic feet per second. When the reactors were operating, they would raise the temperature of the river by 1 whole degree. So that's how much heat was put out back in the day. So anyway, we've done a bunch of interim actions for soil, and we've got groundwater pump and treat in the 100K, and we've got some actions to kind of improve getting some of that deeper contamination out. It's the hex chrome again, and there's Department of Energy is taking down buildings and cocooning the main reactor buildings. They're enclosing them for until they can final disposition. Like a safe, secure enclosure is the word for it. And so I should have said one piece back to reactor operation. As the fuel spent the amount of time it needed to in the reactor, they would push it out into basins out the back, and it would cool there. Well, when the reactors quit running and N reactor shut down, they had stored a bunch of fuel for a long time, and the K basins has been a big project. One of the east basin leaked. The west basin is being cleaned out now, and they'll be removed as well. The east has already been removed now, but that's another significant waste site that is being worked. So anyway, this final remedial investigation is to put a wrapper on the whole 100K area and acknowledge the sites that have been cleaned up. Say, okay, here's the final work to be done. Here's the final work to be done for the groundwater, and again, make it the final decision document. And so we'll be looking at having a proposed plan, which is, so the process again is you do this investigation, feasibility study, risk assessment, and the agency then, in this case, Department of Energy is the lead, but we do it together. We will release a proposed plan and say, it'll summarize the investigation, and it'll talk about, here's the alternatives here's what we found, here's the alternatives, and here's what we think is the right thing to do to deal with it. And that is actually released for public comment. And so that is scheduled to come out this fall. And we'll ask for public comment at the proposed plan, but it's really for the entire administrative record, including the RIFS.
Dave, could you give us maybe a little bit of a preview of the risk assessment in terms of the risk to the Columbia River?
It's been a long time since I've looked at 100K, so and it's not. That's actually Roberto Armijo's project. So I can't. Again, the biggest risk we're looking at is the chrome. We do have 2 radionuclides of interest, and that's cesium-137 and strontium-90. Those are largely held up, but not completely. And so those are the things that we're focusing on in terms of having to manage the risks.
So one of the questions or one of the confusing things about Hanford is there's at least 3 or 4 different regulatory agencies involved: ecology, EPA, and some of the other entities, health agencies, and DOE itself. Can you maybe just give us an overview of who is responsible for what, using this as an example?
Sure. So the Department of Energy is obviously responsible, right? It's their site. They're implementing everything. For 100K, EPA is the primary oversight of that cleanup. That said, we also look to, for example, the Washington State Department of Health, because there is potential for air releases. And they are delegated, they're the delegated authority for the national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants, which includes radionuclides. So while we ultimately sign off on the documents, we look to them for guidance as to, we ask them for some interpretation and guidance on whether or not what energy is proposing is correct. There's a couple of things that we actually still talk to our own air program in terms of alternative monitoring strategies. That's still somewhat held or co-held by EPA. So we ask for some guidance there. So the other very similar timing project is the 100N area, and in that case, the Department of Ecology has the lead for oversight. When it comes time to, after signing or after the public comment on the record of decision or on the proposed plan, we consider comments and develop a record of decision. All 3 agencies, Energy, EPA, and Ecology, sign the ROD. So there's kind of this, yes, we have 100K, they have 100N, but 1, there's a lot of similarities. 2, we just have to work together.
So
Laura, I see your hand.
Yes.
Yeah, Laura, please.
Yes, thank you. Hi, David. I work on the Portland Harbor Superfund site and have for years. So I know a little bit about the process, the record of decision. I just recently learned that there's supposed to also be a biological opinion, a BIOPS, which I don't think was ever delivered to us, which is describes the impact on wildlife. And then of course we have NERDA, natural resources assessment of damages, and we have restoration sites in tandem with the cleanup, you know, that is being planned. I just wonder if Hanford has a bio opinion and restoration sites.
Yeah. So I don't remember on the biological opinion how current it is. I mean, I know there's one, a historic one. It's been a long time since I've seen it, so I'm not sure there. But in terms of the NRDA, the Natural Resource Damages Assessment, there is a whole team. It's not, EPA does not have a trust. We're not a natural resource trustee at a federal facility, so we don't. We go to the occasional meeting, but we're not regular participants. The tribes have been there, the state, and so forth. But that they've got there's a whole team for that, and the NRDA process kind of runs somewhat. There's a lot of they've got a tolling agreement in place, but we're supposed to be gathering, you know, information for them as they as we do our RIFS. We're supposed to be gathering information that they might need as well. So they're supposed to tell us, hey, we need to know this, and so we can feed their process as we go along. And that has been happening. Some, not as probably as effective as we could be, but I'm trying to remember.
If I could, I've got a question that I've heard a couple times, and someone who's, I think, in attendance this meeting is interested in this topic. There are two major bridge projects on the Columbia River downstream of Hanford. They're talking about a new I-5 bridge and a new bridge up around Hood River, maybe somewhere up there. And so there's some concern that as they do dredging and piling and whatever the construction is, that they're going to disturb sediments that have been buried for 30, 40, 50 years. So this may be outside your area of responsibility, but could you comment on what regulatory agency or who's responsible for making sure that we don't dig up past contamination, whatever that might be, from Hanford that was dumped in the river 50, 70 years ago?
So it is a bit outside my area. I can say that I remember reading some reports done by PNL where they cored into sediments, like behind the dams, some of the dams, including McNary, which is the first one downstream. And the way I would summarize what I read is they could detect Hanford contamination, but it was very, very, very low level. I mean, like below any kind of risk-based, way below any kind of risk-based level. It was detectable, but that was it. So the chances of finding something down there where it wasn't dammed up is low. That said, before any kind of dredging project is done, they have to characterize the sediments and know what they're getting into. At least that's what my experience has been. Is they have to do they'll have to do corings and characterize it if they want to be able to, because they need to know what to do with it, right? I mean, whether it's an ocean disposal or an on-land disposal or whatever it may be. They have to characterize it. That's my understanding.
Yeah, thanks. That's very helpful. Sarah.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks, Dave, for mentioning those sediment samples, but I wanted to clarify that a vast majority of those sediment samples were just surface grabs. So the first maybe couple of inches up to maybe 4 inches of sediment was sampled, and yes, Hanford contaminants were usually found, but in very low amounts. However, there were a handful of deep cores. I want to say something like 3 deep cores that were taken, and there again they could see Hanford contaminants, still not at very concerning levels, but there were only 3, and that was done just behind McNary. So we really don't know what's in the deeper sediments in some of the older dams, right? But I just wanted to clarify that.
Tom Cecilia.
Yeah, and to your other point about the disposal, one of our responsibilities is to make sure that no radioactive waste gets disposed in Oregon. So as part of that, any of the spoils from those projects that would be potentially disposed in Oregon would have to be characterized to make sure they're not radioactive waste under our state rules.
That makes sense.
Okay. Please, Dave, carry on.
Yeah. So again, I think I'm kind of done with 100K. I mentioned that 100N, it's ecologies, but it's on a very similar sort of time frame. We're going to be negotiating some short-term milestones for the M15 and M16. So M15 is the characterization milestones, M16 are the remedial action milestones, and M85 are the building removal milestones. So we're going to be negotiating some new milestones in that series, late spring into summer. We'll finally should be approving the 100 BC our remedial design, remedial action work plan. It's been on hold for about a year as the cultural resource issues are worked with the tribes. The 324 building, obviously we're working on that very heavily. And I think you have folks, you've seen the history in the articles that last August, some higher levels of contamination, not higher than what we had found previously, but some higher contamination was found deeper in a place not necessarily expected. And so that was one issue. The building itself mechanically is the mechanical systems in the building are, and it's a 60-year-old building, and they're getting unreliable. So with those two things, the department believes they concluded, and we have agreed that a change is necessary to the remedy. What that is, we don't know yet. So we're doing the department is working with us, and they're going to be doing a focused feasibility study on alternatives. And fully defining the problems. Here are the alternatives, and that will culminate in, again, a proposed plan for public comment and an amended record of decision for the 300 area. I'm not sure what the timing is. We've got a meeting next week with department. I think we'll hear more then about timing, but so it's very much a work in progress, but it is being worked. We're working together, which is the right thing to do.
So Dave, what assurance can you provide that migration from the 324 building is not moving toward the river, since it is only, what, a couple hundred meters away?
Yeah, so there are wells immediately down gradient from the building that would we'd see it. Right now, of course, the building is, again, it's the mechanical systems, not a structural system. Not the structure itself is an issue, and this stuff is all located well underneath the footprint of the building. So there's no motive force at this point to move contamination. The point, well, we are continuing to monitor just to be sure on that. The other part is, if energy, if the alternative that we select is to take the building down before getting to that contamination, we have to be really careful, because that changes that umbrella, if you would. That the building would no longer be providing that weather protection and umbrella. And in fact, in most D&D, you introduce new water. So water management have to be a strong consideration.
Okay, so just to be clear, the principal contaminant there is cesium-137, correct?
Yeah, cesium and strontium.
And
actually, strontium's the one that's more mobile. So that's the one that would be most focused on for mobility. But that said, there was a little bit more cesium than expected in those deeper samples. So okay. We'll be checking that.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Shelley, under our rules of operation, as a member of the public, you will have time later in the meeting for you to ask a question or comment. Anyone else? David, any last remarks?
The only other quick thing I wanted to mention is, we're needing to expand ERDF, and so we put out the notice that we're going to be expanding ERDF next supercell. It'll be starting design, and construction would be a year or two out.
Okay. Thank you very much, David. Good sure. Update, and I think we addressed a few questions that were out there. So next on the agenda is an update from the Washington Department of Ecology. I believe Ryan Miller, David Bowen, are you ready to go?
I think so. Hopefully my microphone's working today. Everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, it's been intermittent. Sounds like I'm muffled, I guess. Ryan's going to go ahead and run the slideshow for me, and I'm going to speak to the points we have. Thanks for having us today, and I'm glad I could hear that last 15 minutes talking with David and hearing the questions back and forth. Next slide. So we're just going to quickly go over our recruitment efforts, outreach and education, the Hanford site funding efforts that we're doing. Touch briefly on negotiations and tri-party agreement compliance activities. Spend a little time on our Revision 9 site-wide permit activities, what's going on there, and then the Hanford site-wide permit update as well. Next slide, Ryan. So recruitment-wise, really pleased with the effort we've made over the last year and a half. We had a high of 31 vacancies out of about 85 to 90 folks, so a huge portion of our team was vacant. We're down to 15 of those. 2 of those are in active recruitment right now. And the others are in various stages of a hiring process, either offers made, reference checks, interviews, recruitment posted, recruitment and development. So we're trying to stay on top of that, make sure we have the resources we need here. As always, knowledge transfer and mentoring, next generation of our team is critical for success for the state of Washington and the nuclear waste program. And for those of you who look at these later online, there is a link down here to any jobs. If you want to forward that to folks, we'd love to have additional applications and expand our applicant pool. Next slide. So I don't know if all of you know Deeb Goswami or not, but after 32 years of service, he did retire a month and a half ago, maybe now, and has gone down to San Antonio, Texas, of all places. I'm going to hang out down there and enjoy retirement. He's been just fantastic, done a lot of work, really put his fingerprints on Hanford cleanup, and especially hydrogeology and soils and that type of thing. So congratulations to him. Going to be a hard shoes to fill. It's one of those postings that are out right now with hydrogeologist 5. So anyway, we're moving forward with getting that filled. It's really a critical position. I didn't realize just how critical until we were preparing for his retirement and saw all the different organizations and people he interacted with and the work that he was doing. So congratulations to him, and I hope his retirement is everything he dreamed of. Next slide, I'm going to hand over to Ryan on outreach and education.
Cool. And just for those interested, if you want to share that position David mentioned, I think it's open through January 23rd still for that hydrogeologist 5 position. Anyway, I thought I'd just recap the last year since we're in January 2023 of outreach and education work that my team did. We attended a total of 33 events, which reached more than 1,700 people. That's students, families, parents, interested members of the public. Those of you might be familiar, and if you're not, I'm happy to chat about it. But we hold these virtual events called Let's Talk About Hanford, where we host it on Facebook and Zoom and do like a high-level topic with a guest speaker, and then just do a Q&A with the public. We held four of those in 2023. Our last one was back in November, and we actually had one of our own staff present, who's actually in his non-Hanford capacity. He's actually an entomologist, so he spoke pretty extensively about insects and that kind of stuff at Hanford. And just to quickly recap, I just wanted to share the last 3 events we attended. We were at this Jefferson Elementary Science Night in Richland back in November, which it was kind of just a STEM night where we just talked with a bunch of students and parents. I went to Roosevelt High School in Seattle and talked to 3 combined classrooms of law and like marketing students, I think, and presented just a general Hanford presentation. And they asked some really awesome questions about Hanford. And then back in December 7th, we went up to the Nez Perce STEM Fair in Idaho. That's a yearly event that they do, and I think this is their 2nd or 3rd year post-pandemic where they've restarted the event, and that's a really, really good event to be a part of. Anyway, 2024, we have a bunch more events on the horizon. I know, Jeff, you were talking earlier about potential outreach and education in Oregon, and we're more than happy to be a part of that. If there's anything we can help out with or attend, we'd love to be a part of that and to try and reach more folks down in Oregon. But if anybody is interested, just is my general pitch. If you'd like us to come chat about Hanford, we could present on something a little more technical. We could do a high-level presentation. You could share a groundwater model. Just send an email to that email address on the bottom of the slide. It's hanford@ecy.wa.gov. But yeah, that's kind of my outreach education. Laura, I see your hands raised. Did you have a question?
Yeah, when I looked at this slide prior to the meeting, I wondered what kind of information about Hanford is being shared, and I wonder, having not attended any of these, if Hanford risks are adequately being shared. I mean, I think, wildlife, insects, all of that is good, but I feel we have a duty to communicate to downwinder communities about the real risk of Hanford. And I just wonder, you just mentioned something about different levels of presentations. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, and that was the only reason I said insects. That was our last Let's Talk about we did. But for example, the Roosevelt High School in Seattle, I talked to those high school students. I did just a general presentation just about what the brief history of Hanford and current cleanup work, and specifically they wanted to get some more information about the kind of environmental laws that work at the Hanford site, which we talked about, like the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, the Superfund. So I focused specifically on that with the students and talked about that kind of stuff. The STEM fair night that I talked about for Jefferson Elementary night, we actually have a groundwater model that we bring, and we show how groundwater contamination and treatment works at the Hanford site. So that's just one example of something we do. We do have some different handouts we hand out. We have one that's that talks about the risks or the health and safety with the Hanford site, and talks about the Columbia River and some kind of common Q&A stuff there. So yeah, we do a pretty wide variety of presentations and information sharing. And later on, when David talks about the Hanford site-wide permit, we're going to talk a little bit about what that public involvement is going to look like. So just a high-level overview of a couple of things, but really, we also just cater to the groups that reach out to us on what kind of information they want and what the audience is. If it's like a group of elementary kids, that's where we'll probably do more habitat and wildlife, because it's kind of hard to talk about nuclear waste cleanup with elementary kids. But like high school and college and community groups like Rotaries, that's where you can get a little bit more into the fun cleanup kind of stuff. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, and I'll go ahead and go to the next slide for you, David.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Ryan. All right, so Hanford budget, never be an update without talking about Hanford budget. So recapping, the president's budget came out around $3 billion back in August for fiscal year 24. Senate and House budgets came out afterwards in very similar range, one just a little above and one a little bit below $3 billion. And if that would be passed, of course, it would be a larger increase over the fiscal year 23 and 22. A lot of people using a unified voice and having outreach to our delegation and the president and OMB has really helped get the Hanford message out there and the urgency of cleanup and funding it. Excuse me. And then, we had, I think you're all aware, we had a letter that Oregon signed on to as well to request a level of funding that was adequate. We've got more work to do, obviously, as we go into start talking about fiscal year 25's budget. There's always that curveball of what's going on right now in the House, and the 24 budget hasn't been passed yet, even though we're 4 or 5 months into the federal budget for 24. They're working on a continuing resolution, and because of just the complications and needing how important this is, especially over the next 3 to 6 years, we did contract with Van Ness Feldman Solutions in DC for federal advocacy work. So they help us set up meetings. They give us a heads up on, whatever rumblings they're hearing around the Capitol, and it really supplements the work we're doing with the governor's office that's in DC as well. So going forward, we know that eventually we're going to need to be in that $4 billion to $4.5 billion range to actually move cleanup forward and get it done within this century. We'll be able to taper off a little bit after some capital projects are done, but like I said, this next 3 to 6 years from a capital project perspective is huge. And Laura, I don't know if your hand is still up or.
David, what can this board do to help?
Well, right now, being on standby while the House finishes up their continuing resolution. I had a conversation with our advocacy folks last week, asking them, when should our next visit be? Probably in March somewhere. I work with Max a lot, and as we get closer to getting ready to have more correspondence and that type of thing, I think having the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board's input in that and participation, that would be fantastic. So that's kind of in a holding pattern for about 45 days, something like that right now. But things could break as, if the House actually comes up with a budget and the Senate agrees and the president signs off, then we're back full speed ahead on 25's budget. All right. Any other questions?
Laura, your hand is up.
It's not coming down for you, I take it.
Okay.
All right.
Go ahead, David.
All right. Next slide, Ryan.
Okay, there you go.
All right. So tri-party negotiations. I think it was May last year. We announced the conceptual agreement between EPA, energy, and ecology, and we're working through those agreed changes. And we're this close. We're this close to being able to actually put in writing what that conceptual agreement is, and everybody is, everybody's at the table. Everybody's working as quickly as we can. We meet weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the topics we're working on. And there's a commitment to try and get all this done as the fiscal year 25 budget discussions are moving forward. So we're getting really close. Another thing to think about as we go into 2024, milestones 15, 16, and 85 series. We're going to be in negotiations on those. Most of those I just saw as I was reading this earlier. I said, what is that? Soil remediation type work is mainly what that is. And so we'll be negotiating some of that this year. We did settle the data access case with energy, and it says ecology and EPA reached settlement. It's actually ecology and energy reached settlement. And there was a September news release on that. We're continuing to, what's happening is we're building a separate database that doesn't have that personally identifiable information in it. That was really the crux of the disagreement. And so as they build that database, once a document or report or whatever is cleared, it won't have to go through clearance every time we're asking for it or trying to access it. So I wish it was as easy as just flicking a switch, but we had looked into that and it wasn't that easy. So I think this was a good outcome, but in the long run will be work out really well. And I believe at the end of the day, this database, once those documents are cleared, it'll be actually available to the public as well as ecology. Mia, your hands up.
Hi, yeah, I wanted to ask about the negotiations on the milestones. Are these milestones the part of the adaptive milestone approach? Are they related to that, or are they different from that?
I believe they're related to that, and it's outside my expertise. I don't know, Ryan, if you know, or David Enan may know.
Yeah, the 15, 16, 85, those are related to the adaptive milestone. It's the next set.
Okay, so have these gone through the tool, the Sellafield computer model, or has that not happened yet?
That tool is one of the things that will be used as information, but it seems like that's a little behind where we expected it to be. So we're going to have to be probably relying on other information too.
For negotiating these specific milestones, correct?
Yes.
And will there be any public comment on these, or is it just a notice on the administrative record that they've been renegotiated?
I'm not sure what all will be how big the scope of these will be. So it depends on how big they are.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, David. Thank you, Mia. All right, next slide. We're going to jump into some of the compliance activities, and I won't read every one of these. For those who are really interested, these are links, so you can go and take a look at them. But we've issued, looks like 7 compliance reports since October to December. That the teams that are working on these, they're just well-oiled machines. And the interesting part is we're finding fewer and fewer violations as we've been going forward over the 3 years that I've been here. I've noticed, so I'm pleased with that. And trying to see if there's anything in here I wanted to specifically hit. I don't think so. Just a variety of facilities, obviously, that we oversee and go out and inspect and put compliance reports together. Next slide. Some other activities, inspections is conducted for the 241 tank system, the liquid effluent retention facility, 400 area waste management unit, once again, CWC, the low-level burial grounds, trenches 31 and 34, and then the low-activity waste pretreatment system LOPS. So we have two different, well, there's actually three of our sections conduct inspections. So some of them are done under our compliance section, some of them are done in our tank waste treatment section, and some are done in our cleanup section. Next slide. So some public involvement opportunities. The Newcon Research Development and Demonstration Permit is going to come out in early 2024. So there'll be a public comment period announcement for that. And that has to do with technology associated with vapors and air quality. The long-awaited 2,000-gallon testbed initiative research development and demonstration permit is estimated to be out in March to April 2024. We're aiming for early March. We're really down to a final document for engineer review associated with one of the facilities, so some drawings. And then the tri-party agreement public involvement survey, please, it's open now. It's on our ecology blog. And if you have any questions, Ryan can forward you a link if this one doesn't happen to work for you. But it's open now, January 3rd to February 16th. Next slide. And more air operating permit compliance activities. This is the waste management section that does most of these. So with July and August, we're very busy trying to get out on site and do all that work while the weather is right. And I saw a different report earlier today that I was reading on a monthly report I get from my sections, and we have a performance partnership agreement with EPA, and our compliance activities, our inspections, and our report writing are on track to meet that obligation to the EPA. So excited to see that our team continues to diligently work on these things. And go back for just a second, Ryan. I'm trying to remember if there's anything on here specific that doesn't look like it. Okay, next slide. All right, so now the Hanford site-wide renewal status. I'm going to cover kind of the process piece, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to talk about public outreach here in a second. So we're planning on a 120-day public comment period, and the minimum is 45. So we're trying. We know it's a huge permit, so we wanted to at least acknowledge up front there's going to be some extra work with this. We will definitely provide early notification of the public comment period, and I believe that's a 30-day, if I remember correctly, that we give on that before we even open the public comment period, so people are aware it's coming. It'll include 48 unit groups and 2 corrective action unit groups, so 50 unit groups total. And within each unit group, there can be anywhere from 5 to 12 sections within it. So it's a huge permit, ends up being approximately 20,000 pages. I think the previous one was 16,000. And we're adding some facilities that were never in the permit before, like the single shell tanks, believe it or not, were never in the permit because they were under interim status. So we're trying to get this fully up to date. It's been a long process to get there. And I guess if there's specific questions, I can try and answer those as to what's going on with that process. So staff from ecology and the permittees, we're working really hard to get everything together. And basically it's collecting the information and the data required in order to actually draft the renewal of the permit. And then in 2012, 2013, there was an initial initiative to get this started. And once it got going, there was a lot of public comment from the public, tribal nations, and permittees. And so we're trying to incorporate the comments from that period of time and answer those as we go forward in this current permit. And Ryan, I'm going to go ahead and let you do the public outreach piece, and then we'll pause for a moment. Well, actually, that's the last slide, so we can do questions.
Perfect. So as you can imagine, the big permit, we were planning a lot of public involvement for it, outreach. This is part of what I've shared before with others, so I just carried over to here because I wanted to share with this board specifically. But we're developing quite a bit of materials for this comment period to try and help the public easier digest it. And one of those methods we have is what we call baseball cards. They're not actual baseball cards; they're actually like a PowerPoint slide that actually will outline like a unit group and provide some high level information about it, some permitting information about it. And I have a sample of one of those at the very end of the slideshow just to pop up if anybody's interested. You can, I know the presentation was attached to the agenda, so you can look at one of the sample baseball cards we're working on if you're interested. But so there's gonna be about a total of 49 of those. And in addition to having those at the public meetings, we're gonna put those up on our website, and they'll be like an interactive, kind of like Adobe, like flip through kind of a book where you could interact and scroll through them. So we're trying to get that digital version in addition to the other version that prepared. Of course, with any comment period, we're going to have a variety of fact sheets and focus sheets and stuff, but we're trying to build upon those a little bit. We actually have a couple like one-pagers we're developing. Like 2 of them are already live on our public comment periods website webpage. One of them is just a one-pager we developed called "What is a Comment Period?" and it just talks about Hanford comment periods and what the process looks like. You know, kind of the steps and timeline for a comment period. And then we've got another one-pager that talks, and I think it's called like how to tips for writing a public comment, and it just offers some tips and suggestions and explainers on, you know, how you can write an effective public comment that you know, like a meaningful public comment for a comment period. Obviously, we try our best to respond to every comment, but if you're trying to write a comment that you know, has the potential to have an impact versus, you know, just an example, if you write your public comment saying "Clean up Hanford," I mean, we'll respond to it. There's just not a lot we can do with a comment like that. So the goal of our one pager was to kind of walk through some tips and ideas on you know, how you can write a comment that can, you know, get a better response from us and possibly, you know, and be incorporated into the permit. So in addition to all that, we're gonna have a dedicated website page. We're gonna be sending out a variety of public notices, news release, and we'll be working and getting some earned media, planning on some social media posts and paid advertising. And this is the component I think that we wanted to hear from this board on some more was we're planning a host of informational meetings and public hearings. There's a bit of a difference there in that public hearings, we actually take formal like oral comment during the meeting. So the informational meetings are meant to be provided before the comment period and kind of at the start of the comment period to provide like general information about the permit, to try and help folks understand it. And then we're going to plan public hearings in the back half of the comment period to actually, you know, take formal comment on the permit. And so we're planning a variety of in-person and online public meetings and public hearings. We're planning them in a couple different spots in Washington as well as down in Oregon. And so what I'm interested in, and it doesn't have to be immediate, but I'm interested to hear from any board members if you guys have any feedback or suggestions on possible, you know, ideal locations for meetings in Oregon, you know, whether it's Portland, Hood River, or if you've got any suggestions for me on like venues, that kind of thing. I'm really just looking for some feedback because we're going to be starting to plan and book meetings once we get closer to, you know, all the permit files being finalized and all that stuff. So I would really be open to any feedback that you guys have and can send to me on just Oregon public outreach and involvement. And then in addition to all that, we're going to be taking comments on we have an e-comment system website where you could submit comments virtually, and you can also send them to us in mail or over email. So a couple different avenues for actually submitting your public comment. I'll pause there. And Laura, I see you had your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Yes, I wonder who, this is a bigger picture for my head. Who is the permit being submitted to? DOE? I'm a little confused about, you're applying for a permit for Hanford, a renewal. What is that to DOE?
No, there's an existing site-wide permit, and then typically every 5 to 7 years you would renew a permit. This just hasn't happened for a really long time here at Hanford. And what happens is Department of Energy is applying for a renewal of their permit with the upgrades, the ecology, and what you do is lessons learned from the previous permit, you try and incorporate that in the new one. And so in this case, it's Energy's permit. They're requesting the renewal, and we're working through making sure we have all the information we need in order to declare that the renewal is complete.
So DOE is requesting from state of Washington a renewal.
Technically, yes.
Okay. I just didn't quite understand. I was just
No.
confused on that.
I fully get it. Yeah, it's and EPA is very concerned about us getting this done as well. So we've got a little pressure from EPA to get it done with our delegated authority. And there's just, it's been so long. It's time to update the permit.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Ryan, Jeff White here. We will talk about what venues might be appropriate and with Odo about whether Portland, Hood River, maybe Umatilla as well. But we'll get back to you in the coming months on that.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so any feedback's welcome. So thank you so much.
So we have the acronyms in case we missed something in our presentation. So that's there. And then next slide is any other questions you might have.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank
As
you.
usual, great presentation. We appreciate your taking the time today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so we can, I would be in favor of pushing forward and maybe ending this meeting a little early if since we've already had one break, maybe we could skip this break and move forward. Does anybody object to that?
Chair, I just wanted to add that Tom Roberts just sent me a note and he had to depart.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. Well, the next item on the agenda is the Oregon Department of Energy updates. Max was going to do that. Do we have a stand-in for Max today?
I believe either Sarah and I have a couple of items that we could add for our Odo update.
Please do.
Okay. Well, as alluded to in the presentations that you've already seen, I've been working a little bit on TBI. The Oregon Department of Energy, we banded together and submitted a document to the EPA about the TBI and the change of the LDR land disposal requirements for those 2,000 gallons. Paraphrasing it a little bit is we appreciated that the EPA really narrowed the scope of their variance. So it was just those 2,000 gallons from just that tank after it had to go through a certain treatment and it goes to a certain place in certain amounts. So it was very narrow in scope, but we did also note that some of the language used in the federal docket, the variance docket, could be interpreted a little more broadly in the future should they choose to want to grout or send other liquids off of Hanford. So we noted that as well. Additionally, we have System Plan 10 that just came out. I don't know if anyone's seen that system plan. We're working on that to see if there is material there that we want to comment on. If anyone here remembers the analysis of alternatives from last year, it's similar to that in that it's not a decision document. But the System Plan 10 is kind of the pathway. They lay out this plan of how they want to treat the tank waste and where they want to, how they want to approach the tank waste mission, when they want to approach certain tanks, when they want to put infrastructure into certain areas so that they can get that tank farm out. We're digging into that right now. I will be probably approaching our friends in ecology and DOE to see if there's common opportunity on that. Unlike the AOA, which was done by the National Academy of Sciences in Engineering and Medicine, which really had a lot of public comment, this one doesn't explicitly lay out a comment period. So we need to explore that as well. Those are two of the big things we have been working on. And this system plan, you might have noticed that 2.7 billion that was allocated to Hanford in fiscal year 22, that was from the ecology presentation. That the system plan lays out a whole lot of alternatives, like do we add extra tanks? Is our funding constrained? And if it is constrained, the funding is constrained at that 2.7 billion. What if it's not constrained? So there's a lot of options to go through. They'll take up our time, and we await to see Ecology's TBI work later in March, and Holistics. And I'll keep an eye on the NUCON permits as well, the research and development permit for that as well. So that's what we have been working on. I think Sarah has some material as well for NERDA.
Thanks, Matt. I was going to give a brief update, not unless, Tom, did you want to add anything to what Matt said? You came on. And
No, I'll go after you.
Okay. So I was just going to give a really high level update on what the Hanford Natural Resource Trustee Council, excuse me, is doing for the natural resource damage assessment. And I'll back up a little bit and I'll explain that a natural resource damage assessment is part of the regulations of Superfund, of CERCLA. It is also covered in other regulations like the Oil Pollution Act, but CERCLA specifically addresses how to do a natural resource damage assessment. The natural resource trustees are appointed by every single state by their governor. Governor Barbara Roberts has appointed Odo as the representative for the Hanford site, but otherwise all other natural resource damage assessments are done by two co-trustees. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife do all other natural resource damage assessments in Oregon. So for example, the Portland Harbor case is being handled by those two trustees. So I represent the Oregon public on the Hanford Natural Resource Trustee Council that is assessing the injury that was caused by releases of contaminants at Hanford and any sort of actions such as cleanup actions, bulldozing and earth moving that is in response to those releases. So a large part of the natural resource damage assessment is actually going to be those physical changes to the landscape caused by the cleanup. So the Natural Resource Trustee Council is actually 8 different trustees, for anyone who hasn't heard me talk about this before. That's the state of Washington, state of Oregon, 3 tribes, the Nez Perce tribe, the Umatilla, and the Yakama Nation, and then 3 federal agencies. NOAA, DOE is a trustee on the council, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So the 8 of us meet regularly, monthly, and in between our major monthly meetings. We meet regularly, and the really high level update for the trustee council is that we're wrapping up the aquatic baseline report. And baseline is really trying to get a handle on all of the different things that could be influencing the natural resources on Hanford site that doesn't have to do with those releases. So it could include the dams and that the effect of the dams on the natural resources in the river, and there are a lot of effects there. So, and diseases as well as other agricultural runoff. So we need to get an understanding of all of those baseline issues before we can really figure out now what are those issues that are being caused by the releases from Hanford or the responses to those releases. So the baseline report has just been finished. We've also got a groundwater surface water interaction report that has just been finished. Tom, Cecilia helped out with that one as well. And so that's, we have a lot of contaminated groundwater entering the river. And once it reaches the river, it really becomes diluted very quickly because the Columbia River is so large. But there's this interface where there are many biota that live in the gravel, in the substrate of the river that is getting the full force of the groundwater. So what influences is that having on the biota on the river at Hanford? So that report just came out, and together, working with the baseline report and the groundwater surface water report, we've been pretty busy trying to figure out next steps and how to use the information coming from those contractor-led reports. And then the really big news too is that we are finally going to get a NERDA expert to help the council sort of pull all of these pieces together, because beyond those two reports, we have many reports that come out of Hanford from the cleanup side, as well as our own investigations and reports. So there are many pieces to this natural resource damage assessment, and we have made a lot of progress in telling some of the stories of what's going on, but this NERDA expert, we hope, will be able to show us sort of the best, most strongest arguments to pursue to create a case so that the public, the Oregon public, Washington public, the tribal public will have those ecosystem services restored, and the public is considered whole. That's language from the Superfund. So any questions for that on that? Yeah, Laura.
I'm surprised that this is happening now. I mean, Hanford has been many Superfunds cleanup for a very long time, and I'm surprised that this is, happening now. I'm grateful that it is. It all sounds really positive, but why has it taken so long? I guess.
So there have been a lot of efforts in the past to, there have been studies in the past. So when Paul Schaefer was in my position, I think the big things that they were working on was to determine the disturbance inventory, which has been done. So we know what those disturbances have been, as well, and then what disturbances will occur when the final cleanup is you have to kind of predict there, but what those cleanup disturbances will be. They did studies on the effects of the contaminants on salmon in particular. There's been a lot of work on salmon, and the other focus I think that they had on in the past was in determining which species to pursue. There's also been a lot of work done on the it's called restoration framework. So once you figure out the injury, you need to figure out what kind of restoration will resolve those injuries, will compensate those injuries. So those frameworks were built first so that we could focus, and I'm not exactly sure why the restoration frameworks were built before the injury assessment was completed. That was before my time. I don't really know, but it does make it easier when the injury assessment is completed to go straight into restoration. I do kind of know why that was done. There was a point at which a property, a huge chunk of pristine shrub steppe habitat was being considered for purchase. So DOE was going to compensate the public, and instead of doing some of the restoration in areas where they really couldn't restore. So in those areas where ERDF was built, or where huge footprints were just going to be there as part of forever, as part of the cleanup. So they were going to take an equal amount of shrub steppe habitat elsewhere to compensate the public, and then make sure that that land was restored, what was maintained, was kept pristine. So, and that's acceptable. That's a trade-off that you can do, but those negotiations sort of fell apart because the tribes in particular didn't know what that was worth in the currency that we use in a natural resource damage assessment, which is a DSAY, a discounted service acre year. So how many DSAYs was that restoration, or was that conservation project going to be worth when we finally figured out the injury assessment? And we didn't know because we didn't have that restoration framework in place. So there was this real emphasis on developing that restoration framework so that in the future, if we have that opportunity again, the McWhorter Ranch, by the way, ended up being sold to someone else because it took the trustee council a very long time to make these negotiations. And in the end, the tribes were not satisfied because they didn't know what they were getting in the end. There was just this like quick hurry, let's purchase this pristine habitat, but what is it going to be worth in the end? It was, and nobody could say, right? Because we didn't have that restoration framework in place. Anyway, that the trustee council is busy. I'll tell you that. It's a huge site. We have groundwater actually mostly figured out. We know the injury in the groundwater. We are now beginning to work on restoration projects. That would be exciting. So Oregon wouldn't expect, because it's not our natural resource that is being injured. Our natural resource is really on the river. However, it is a natural resource groundwater is a natural resource that was injured for the Umatilla. And so in the Pendleton area, I will fight hard to have some groundwater restoration, probably in the form of an aquifer recharge project in the Pendleton area. So I will throw what weight I can behind the Umatilla in arguing for an aquifer recharge project in the Pendleton area. So those are the kinds of things that happen on the Natural Resource Trustee Council, right? So yeah.
And to Laura, your point also, that yes, this has taken a long time, but there are a lot of NRDAs that don't start until the remediation is completely done. So we're also ahead of the game. So it's sort of this weird balance.
Yeah. And I am also thinking with the Portland Harbor Superfund site, it's also taken a long time, just not as long. But I'm grateful for that background. And
then I just want to wrap up a couple other things that the team is working on. One that I did I did a presentation on Hanford Challenge Scholar Series on groundwater modeling that you should check out. And then not Hanford related, our team is also working on the energy security plan for the state of Oregon, which is a federal requirement to assess electricity, liquid fuels, propane, and aviation fuel and natural gas, and propose some mitigation to sort of minimize risk. We have a draft plan out right now, And if you're interested, or your entity that you work with is interested in being part of the conversation, definitely sign up. We're going to be doing statewide outreach over the next few months, next 6 months or so.
Okay, thank you, Odo, for the update. It was educational. We're going to move on now to board business. And the first item here is an update from Stephen, and I think maybe Tom as well, on updating the board's bylaws. Stephen?
Yes. Hey there. Sorry about that. Right. So Tom and I met and looked at the bylaws. It had been a while. The background for why we did that is we realized it had been a while since anyone actually looked at them, and also that there were different kinds of things that the board was starting to do that were not specifically described or defined what the process was going to be like in the bylaws. So specifically things like writing letters on, as like an official board activity, to whoever. It was never actually spelled out in the board, like what the rules were for that, how many of us had to vote on approving a letter, how long we would have to look at a draft of a letter, and so on and so forth. And so Tom and I went over things. Tom brought some of his experience from HAB and previous bylaws in this. Tom, I don't suppose you have we sent around the draft change, right?
I can share it if you'd like on the screen.
If you've got it handy, I just realized I don't actually have it handy on this computer. The things we proposed putting in here are mostly things about clarification, and then a few specific scenarios that we realized we didn't have language for. So I figure the thing to do might just be to kind of go through them real quick. Basically, we just put in here some language saying that, in addition to all of the stuff that we do, we also, may issue comments and so on, which I think it was, fairly clear we could do that before, but now it's actually written down somewhere that that's part of what we're supposed to be doing, which seems reasonable. The next set of changes we put in here was some clarification around what counts as a majority, which we realized there were some ambiguous edge cases there. Especially for situations like the one we're in now, where we're short a couple seated members, the way it was written before, in a situation where we were actually short seated members, we could have, depending on how you read things, might have not been able to do stuff because the number of now it's clear we have to have a majority, and define what that means. Tom, what was
there was
the
also a
thing?
question with the highlighted section. There was question
Yes.
of whether we wanted to include this language, which is sort of punitive. If you miss 2 meetings in a row, then, like, according to this, you would be kicked off the board. It's not something we typically have done, but want to make sure whether we wanted that language to persist or not.
And that's language that we'd had in here, right? And hadn't been
Correct.
actually following as such. And so we thought it would be worth bringing that up as a subject of discussion about how we want to handle that kind of situation. And then continuing on, we had some stuff in here that we added about what to do about getting how to boot a chair and a vice chair. That was somewhat unspecified, and then it was unspecified what happens if, after booting the chair, the way it was written, it wasn't clear that it was possible to make a new chair because there couldn't have been someone it was ambiguous about how we would introduce new business of making a new chair. And from what we were able to figure out under the sort of normal Robert's rules kind of situation, and that kind of it is possible in that sort of situation that, everyone can vote to suspend normal order to vote a new person in. We thought it would be helpful just to kind of write down what we think, have it written down more clearly. So if that weird situation should ever arise, there's not, further stress of trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. So we have an actual plan here written out of what to do. And obviously, if people have opinions about what we've outlined here as a proposal, that is something we can totally talk about. We just thought this would be like the easiest path. So basically, if both the chair and the vice chair are gone, then whoever are legislative members or Odo staff become the temporary chair just long enough to formally propose a vote for a new chair, and things get back to normal. Then we added some language clarifying that not only will administrative staff be taking minutes, but there'll be recordings now that we have Teams as an option, as a normal sort of course of business. Now it's specified that recordings are being made. That was not something that was specified before, because last time this had been looked at, that didn't exist. And then the sort of impetus for this whole thing was about board communication. So now we have this proposal that if there's any letters of public comments that the board wants to make, that the chair or staff will distribute those letters to everyone on the board for a certain amount of time for us all to get a chance to look at it. And if there's, no major changes proposed in that time period, we can do an email vote. We don't need to wait for the next official quarterly meeting to all agree. If there's edits that require a substantial new draft, and we have some language that we're talking beyond just kind of grammar and word choice, but if it's actual substantive content that's added, then we have another period to look it over. And if whatever's going on is needing multiple rounds of this, then it's probably figured it was best to kind of wait till we can have an actual proper board meeting. But does that seem, I guess the question is, does that seem like a same process? And if it doesn't, obviously we can talk about it. Then I think, Tom, that was pretty much it, or did we have, oh yeah, some language. We didn't actually have anything in the bylaws about what someone has to do to get kicked off the board. And it seemed we were having a hard time thinking of scenarios where this would be important, but just enough other kind of public boards and commissions over the last few years have been trying to kind of nail down what sort of things are involved in disqualifying someone. So it seemed like a reasonable thing to do. So if someone does something that makes them ineligible under Oregon rules for being on a public board or commission, the bylaws now clarify that means they're off. And then if 2/3 of the appointed board members agree with the chair or a state representative, someone can be expelled, and that wasn't the case before. It was actually like a very ambiguous gray area. So hopefully this is just a matter of having stuff actually written down. So if we ever actually, in the extraordinarily unlikely event this ever comes up, now it's at least written down somewhere what we're supposed to do. So that's what we came up with.
Okay, Stephen, this looks good. I think we need to more or less follow your proposal here and send this out to the board for comments, and then bring it back at the next meeting for formal approval. Is that what you're thinking?
That is indeed what we're thinking. Obviously, if anybody has any other things they think need to go in here, that's great. If everyone has concerns or issues about any of the proposals that we have in here, like, please, let's discuss them. We can, do all of that asynchronously, I imagine. Yeah, if anyone has thoughts about anything that's come up just now, I'm sure we have a few minutes. We can talk about it at this point, or we can all look at what was written in there and. Yeah.
Okay, if there aren't any comments, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. that is the annual report. So Max is not here, so Tom, your name is on here. You want to talk about the annual report to the state legislature and the governor's office?
Sure, let me get it pulled up.
And as a preface to this discussion, I think from my perspective, this is really an excellent first draft. But the question in particular for our legislators is, you know, we need your input on, is this suitable for the audience, that is the legislature and the governor's office?
Okay.
Go ahead.
So yeah, we've got the draft Hanford policy update. This would be, the goal here would be to distribute this to the legislature after the short session. So looking at the March timeframe, we've got an executive summary, which just goes over some high level discussion and has a nice picture of some elk. And then I lost my mouse. There it is. Then table of contents. So we talk a little bit about the Hanford site and what Oregon's role is, who the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board is, what Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board did in 2023, and then what Odo had did with regard to Hanford in 23, and then sort of a precursor of what to expect in 24. So the sort of glossy 2-page Hanford history covering the Manhattan Project and the Cold War, high level stuff, not going into very many weeds, but showing why Oregon cares. Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board's legislative authority and composition, and then sort of meeting summaries, picture from our tour, and talking about the letter that Odo and OHCB co-wrote to the legislators in Washington, D.C., trying to get money for Hanford. Then just Odo's accomplishments. And then what we're looking for in 24, which is the holistic negotiations, Rev 9 of the statewide RECRA permit, cleanup decisions on the river corridor. Those are the 3 things that we heard the regulators talk about today. Melter 2 heat up, which we heard DOE talk about, and then progress on the testbed initiative. So anything that's missing from this list, or any big changes that you have to the document that went out, would be appreciated. We're going to have our comms team, make it formatted appropriately and all of that. But yeah, specifically from the legislators on the board, does this hit the mark? Is it too simplistic? Is it too complex? What are we shooting for here?
I didn't get to completely read it. I read about halfway through it. I would love to get a chance to finish that, but I didn't get to any, and now I'm blanking on the name of the building, but the building where they had started to experiment, and there's now a really bad mess. 240?
324.
324. Is that detailed in this? I didn't see it, but like I said, I didn't finish reading it.
I'm not going to make everyone dizzy and look for it, but I don't know that we did a detailed summary of the 324 building. But it is, I think it might be referenced in the blog post that we did at Odo. So if there's not a reference to that blog post, I'll make sure that gets added.
Well, my recommendation would be that there would be an actual explanation of what the situation is and how it occurred in this document directly.
Okay.
Because that's pretty extreme, and I think there's not a lot of awareness.
So Rep. Gamba, is the level of detail here appropriate, or too much, too little?
For the portion that I read, it seemed pretty good. Like I said, you're producing this for an audience that is going to be very mixed in their knowledge on this, from absolutely knowing nothing about it to some knowledge. So I think that the general way it's laid out to sort of give people that background is important. And I think predominantly the level is good, but like I said, I think they should be aware of sort of the worst issues in more detail so that those are drawn out.
Okay, that makes sense. Mia, did you have a comment?
I'm just wondering if I found a few typos and like more grammatical errors in this, and I was wondering if it's going to go through another revision of just read through and check for that.
Yes, anything you find, send to me, but it's also going to go through our comms department before it goes out. So there will be multiple sets of eyes.
Okay, good. And then I just looked through it and I don't see a reference to that 324 building blog post in it. So that I think that would be great to add. I second Rep. Gamba's suggestion.
Okay, we'll add it to the key items to watch in 24 with a bit of history and a link to the blog post as well.
Thanks.
So, Tom, when will this be ready to issue? Short in the week or weeks after the short legislative session, or should we give it a month?
It could be ready as soon as it needs to be, but I'll defer to the legislators here to when it would be when would have the most impact to send it out.
Well, Gorsuch has been around a whole lot longer than I have, but I would recommend probably not during the short session or the 2 weeks following that. So maybe April would make sense.
I think that's right.
Okay. So we'll get everything cleaned up and circulated with the 324 added in the next month or so it's ready to go for April.
Okay.